It was the age of legends, when Hollywood's silver screen gleamed with men who seemed larger than life. But behind those golden lights, many of its icons carried a secret they fought to bury. Some were forced to stand on wooden boxes, others filmed beside shorter co-stars, and a few even went under the surgeon's knife. All for one reason: to appear taller than they truly were. For actors like Kirk Douglas, Humphrey Bogart, and Frank Sinatra, height was more than a number. It was a battle for dignity in an industry that worshipped perfection. Beneath the fame, every inch became a war. Kirk Douglas, the undersized warrior. When Spartacus began filming in 1960, Kirk Douglas was at the peak of his career and already at war with his own reflection. Under the blazing California sun, the Universal Studios lot turned into a battlefield, not just for Roman soldiers, but for Douglas's image. At 5'8", he was below the Hollywood ideal of a heroic 6-foot frame. Director Stanley Kubrick reportedly ordered the ground beneath the extras dug lower so that Douglas, playing the rebel leader, could tower over his guards. A lighting technician told the Los Angeles Times that Kubrick even adjusted the camera angle to make Douglas look more commanding. For Douglas, these small tricks cut deep. His explosive temper, often described by co-stars as a fuse waiting to blow, wasn't just about artistic perfection. It came from years of being reminded that he didn't measure up, literally. During a 1949 poster shoot for Chaplin, when a photographer suggested a booster box, Douglas slammed his gloves to the ground and stormed out, shouting, "Do you take me for a joke?" Still, what he lacked in height, he made up for in defiance. When most of Hollywood bowed to fear during the McCarthy era, Douglas risked everything to credit blacklisted writer Dalton Trumbo on Spartacus. That single act broke the industry's silence and ended one of its darkest periods. The New York Times later called him the small warrior who challenged the system. Yet even triumphs carried scars. Douglas admitted late in life that fame never silenced his insecurities. "I always felt I had to fight harder," he once said. By the time he received an honorary Oscar in 1996, his speech was slurred from a stroke, but when the audience rose to their feet, it was clear a man once mocked for being small had become one of Hollywood's true giants. Humphrey Bogart, the hero who stood on a box. In January 1942, the set of Casablanca buzzed with tension. Ingrid Bergman, tall, elegant, and radiant, stood in heels beside Humphrey Bogart. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Bergman reached nearly 5'9", Bogart barely 5'7". Director Michael Curtis stopped the scene cold and snapped, "Get the platform." A small wooden box was slid beneath Bogart's shoes, and the frame suddenly balanced. The crew laughed quietly among themselves, nicknaming it the Bogart box. That box followed him through nearly every production, from Casablanca to The Big Sleep, an unspoken companion to the man the world saw as the embodiment of toughness. Bogart hated the trick. He'd occasionally kick the box aside during rehearsals, muttering, "Bring me a drink, I don't need a damn box." But Warner Brothers insisted. Studio press sheets falsely listed him at 5'10", and interviews were staged so he'd appear sitting slightly higher than others. Variety joked, "Bogey travels with a suitcase, not for clothes, but to hide the box." Behind the sarcasm was something darker. Bogart had spent years fighting his way out of supporting roles, only to be told that he didn't look tall enough to play a leading man. It was his voice and defiant posture that finally broke through. Film critic Pauline Kael wrote that, "When Bogart enters a room, you feel his presence before you register his size. He became the face of masculine resilience, a man who looked fragile on paper but radiated dominance on screen. And yet, in private, he confessed that the image was exhausting to maintain. During his marriage to Lauren Bacall, who was nearly his height, photographers were instructed to angle the lens slightly downward, so he'd still appear taller. 'It's all smoke and mirrors,' Bacall later said. But he hated that box more than anything. He wanted to be tall on his own. Bogart's life ended in 1957 when esophageal cancer took him at just 57. The New Yorker eulogized him as the last true man of Hollywood. Few remembered the box. What stayed instead was the defiance, the short man who, for 2 decades, convinced the world that no one stood taller. Frank Sinatra, the king in elevator shoes. By 1951, Frank Sinatra's fame was collapsing. His once golden voice was fading, his marriage to Nancy Barbato was over, and gossip columns called him washed up. Then the New York Post published a strange headline: Sinatra buys elevator shoes. The article revealed he'd ordered a dozen pairs from Delmonico's in Manhattan, each designed to add 2.5 inches to his height. Sinatra was 5'7", average for most men, but not for a Hollywood idol surrounded by 6-foot crooners and leading men. The shoemaker even confessed Sinatra requested hollow soles filled with lead so he wouldn't walk too lightly and give away the secret. Within hours, the story exploded. Comics on late-night radio joked that Frank's reaching new heights in music. Behind the laughter, the humiliation cut deep. In 1953, during a furious argument with his second wife, Ava Gardner, he punched a hotel mirror until his knuckles bled. Witnesses swore they heard her yell, "You'll never reach the top, not even on your toes." The tabloids fed on it. Sinatra's temper, gambling, and mob rumors became fixtures in the Los Angeles Times and Life magazine. But instead of breaking him, the mockery turned him ruthless. He fought for the lead role in From Here to Eternity, begging Columbia Pictures for one more chance. The studio reluctantly agreed, and Sinatra delivered the performance of his life. He won the 1954 Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, his first comeback in years. From that night on, the little man from Hoboken walked taller than anyone in the room. By the 1960s, he was earning $35,000 a night in Las Vegas and commanding respect even from mob bosses who once mocked him. Still, the insecurities never vanished. He reportedly wore lifts on stage until the end, sometimes layered inside handmade Ferragamo shoes. When asked about it in 1970, he brushed it off with a smile. "You think the crowd's here for my height?" But friends said he never left his dressing room without checking his reflection twice. The small singer had become America's symbol of swagger and danger, a man who couldn't change his size but could still dominate every room he entered. Behind that confidence, though, was the same quiet fear that haunted so many of Hollywood's giants: the terror of being seen exactly as he was. Charlie Chaplin, the clown with dark secrets. For millions, Charlie Chaplin was the world's favorite man. Yet few knew he was barely 5'5" and carried scandals that could have destroyed anyone else. In the early 1920s, Chaplin's short stature didn't seem to matter. As the tramp, he turned smallness into a weapon. Oversized trousers, a tight coat, a bowler hat tilted just so. The image made him endearing, almost childlike. Audiences adored him, but that same childlike aura would one day turn against him. In 1924, newspapers detonated with the headline, "Chaplin marries 16-year-old Lita Gray." The ceremony took place in Mexico because California law would have seen him prosecuted for relations with a minor. He was 35. The backlash was instant. The Los Angeles Times called it Hollywood's darkest wedding. The years that followed only deepened the shadow. FBI files, later declassified in 1952, accused Chaplin of immoral conduct with hundreds of women, some underage. Whether true or exaggerated, the rumors stuck. In 1943, an unknown actress named Joan Barry filed a paternity suit, claiming Chaplin was the father of her child. Blood tests proved he wasn't, but the court ordered him to pay support anyway. The verdict shattered his public image. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted, How does the little man feel now? Chaplin left America soon after, exiled by scandal and the anti-communist hysteria that followed. He settled in Switzerland, far from the studios he helped build. By then, the childlike tramp who once symbolized innocence had become a broken exile, his laughter dulled by shame. But in a cruel twist of fate, his height, the very trait once mocked, remained his greatest cinematic gift. Studies from Columbia University in 1925 even showed that audiences empathized more with him precisely because he was smaller. His struggles seemed greater, his victories more human. When he died in 1977, his body was stolen from a Swiss cemetery by thieves demanding ransom. Police recovered it months later, buried in a field. It was a bizarre final act for the man who once made the world laugh. The small clown had conquered the globe, but his own demons never let him rest. Mickey Rooney, the eternal boy who couldn't grow up. If Kirk Douglas fought to look tall and Sinatra hid behind shoes, Mickey Rooney's curse was that he never looked grown up at all. At 5'2", he was the shortest leading man in Hollywood's golden era, and for 3 years straight, from 1939 to 1941, he was the highest-paid actor in America. As Andy Hardy, the wide-eyed teenager in MGM's hit series, Rooney earned the studio more money than Clark Gable or Gary Cooper. Audiences adored his boyish face and frantic energy. But the role that made him famous also trapped him. When World War II ended, he returned a decorated soldier, only to find the studios didn't know what to do with him. He looked too small, too youthful to play a grown man. Casting directors scribbled the same note beside his name: height problem. His personal life soon mirrored that decline. In 1942, he married Ava Gardner, then a rising star known for her beauty and height. The marriage lasted a year. Gardner later joked at parties that Rooney was a great actor, but a very small man, a cruel comment that spread through Hollywood like wildfire. By the 1950s, Rooney was gambling away what remained of his fortune in Las Vegas. He was photographed drunk on a curb outside the Flamingo, his pockets turned inside out. The Las Vegas Sun called it the fall of the Hardy Boy. Yet, he kept coming back. When his career finally hit bottom, he found redemption in 1979 with The Black Stallion, playing a washed-up jockey, finally a role where being small made sense. Critics praised him as the little man who grew larger through pain. Rooney lived long enough to see his name restored on marquees, but the boyish glow that once made him a star had faded into tragedy. 8 marriages, countless debts, and a lifetime of jokes about his size left scars deeper than anyone could see. When he died in 2014, the New York Times wrote, "He was the shortest of stars, but his life stretched further than most could endure." James Cagney, the small man with the explosive temper. James Cagney didn't look like a gangster. At barely 5'5", he was compact, wiry, and often mistaken for a teenager when he first arrived at Warner Brothers. But the moment he exploded on screen in The Public Enemy, audiences forgot his size. That grapefruit scene, where he slammed fruit into Mae Clark's face, shocked America. Critics wrote that Cagney sprang like a coiled spring, small but lethal. The studios, however, feared the truth might ruin the illusion. Press kits listed him as 5'9", and camera crews were ordered to shoot him from low angles. In group photos, he stood on boxes, or the taller co-stars were asked to slouch. But secrets like that never stayed buried long. When a variety photographer caught him standing amid a cast in 1934, he looked nearly a head shorter. The editor joked, "This is the gangster boss? He looks like a kid in a yard full of men." The remark cut deep. Cagney's temper became infamous. On one set, he reportedly lunged at an assistant director who called him the little guy with the loud mouth. His rages weren't just ego, they came from decades of being underestimated. Hollywood whispers claimed he even considered a dangerous leg-lengthening surgery in the late 1930s. a rumor never proven but widely believed. Still, Cagney turned those insecurities into fuel. His performances radiated volcanic tension. He didn't dominate through height. He did it through force. His voice cracked like gunfire, his movements sharp and unpredictable. By the time he starred in White Heat, screaming, "Made it, Ma!" Top of the world. As flames engulfed him, it was clear no actor stood taller in spirit. He won an Oscar for Yankee Doodle Dandy in 1943, and decades later, the American Film Institute ranked him among the top 10 actors of all time. The irony was poetic. The man mocked for his size had redefined power on screen. He once told a reporter, "I don't need inches. I've got punch." Edward G. Robinson, the short Caesar on trial. If Cagney was Hollywood's firecracker, Edward G. Robinson was its slow-burning menace. At 5'5", stocky and thick-necked, he hardly looked the part of a crime lord. But when Little Caesar hit theaters in 1931, his glare froze audiences. He didn't need to tower over anyone. His voice did that for him. Warner Brothers faked his height in every press release, claiming he was 5'9". Sets were designed to trick the eye, low ceilings, elevated chairs, and shorter extras. Yet Robinson's authority transcended illusion. The New York Times wrote, "He doesn't need height. His eyes hush the room." Off-screen, life was less kind. In 1952, during the Red Scare, Robinson was hauled before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Newspapers ran mocking headlines, "Little Caesar on trial." Though he denied being a communist, the damage was done. Studios distanced themselves, his contracts vanished overnight. He went from earning $85,000 per film to taking minor parts just to survive. Friends said the humiliation cut worse than any loss of money. Robinson, who owned a priceless art collection of Van Goghs and Picassos, confessed one night after too many drinks, "Give me 4 more inches, and no one would dare mock me." He died in 1973, just months before he was to receive an honorary Oscar. The Academy still delivered it to his widow. Robinson's life was proof of how Hollywood could turn a man's strength into weakness overnight. He'd once ruled the screen with nothing but his eyes, yet spent his final years haunted by the same insecurity he'd fought all along, being seen as small in a world that demanded giants. They called them leading men, yet so many spent their lives digging trenches, wearing lifts, or standing on boxes just to be seen as tall enough to matter. Behind the glamour of Hollywood's golden age were small men with giant hearts, and often heartbreaking secrets. Do you think these stars would still be judged the same way today? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because more hidden Hollywood stories are coming soon.